The next feature I want to introduce is the document object model. This, for the purposes of actually writing HTML, sits somewhat in the background, but it perhaps helps you understand the structure of HTML documents a little bit more. But the more important feature of the document object model is that when it comes to next steps in use of HTML, such as styling and adding dynamic features, it's the document object model, the DOM, which cascading style sheets and JavaScript respectively will use to enable many of the advanced features of HTML. So what I want to do today is to introduce the HTML document object model and to say, as I'm doing that, a little bit more about why it is so important. And on the way, we're going to introduce another part of the syntax of elements, which are the attributes which can be incorporated into HTML tags. To start off with, let's just go back to the example document and take a look at that. There's already here the beginnings of a tree-like structure. We've got a root element, and then that expands out into a head and a body. The head itself expands out into a title with some potential for other elements to be there, and the body in our simple example has got one paragraph, but with a properly marked up document, then of course there'll be a large amount of content, which again will form a tree-like structure within the body of the HTML document. So we've got the emerging of some tree-like structure which we can navigate around and identify elements from, and also we've got a little bit of structure within the elements themselves. So let's go and remind ourselves a little bit about what makes up an HTML element. For reasons which you'll see in a moment, I've rewritten this one as a level 1 heading. This is a valid HTML element, and just to remind you, it starts with a start tag, it closes with an end tag with a naming in common between the two to make it easy to parse and to associate beginnings and endings with of tags. And in the center is the content. And it's that whole thing which makes an HTML element. Tags, content combine to make up an HTML element. So what we've got actually is something which is an entity with some properties. And in fact, as I said in the opening slide, there can be some more properties in there, because what an HTML allows us to do are to add attributes to an element by including those attributes in the start tag. Those are optional. You can have 0 or more attributes. They're separated by white space. They're name value pairs, and some of them have values which are fixed, not changeable. We'll see a little bit more about that later in this chapter. Some of them, such as IDs and classes, we have a free hand about the names, and we can change the names as well dynamically. That will become very important when it comes to looking at styling. So what we have now is something which looks a little bit like an object in a sense. We can give the object a name, and it can have some attributes, optional ones, and in fact they're all optional. You could have an element with empty content, so doesn't have to have any content, but you can see that, think of that as an object with a name and a set of attributes or properties. So that's the first thing, and what the Document Object Model API enables us to do is to change the values of certain of those attributes. There are some where the names are fixed and we cannot change them. We're not able to do that, neither would we want to, but there are others like the ID attributes and the class attributes where we could dynamically change the value. And by changing the value dynamically, for example, of a class, we can, and we've got, as looking forward a little bit to CSS, we've got styles associated with particular classes of attributes. That gives us a way for updating sets of styling across the website. What we can also do, of course, is to change the value of the content, and that's going to be a very important role of Ajax-y kinds of interaction styles, which again we'll see in the advanced course. But that's the key thing. This is one of the key values of HTML. The Document Object Model API enables us to access and possibly change values of attributes of the objects within the object model. So going back to our document, it means that the elements within a page are changeable. We don't have to refresh the whole page. We can actually directly access and update properties of elements within our page. And it gets more interesting than that too, because if we're looking at these as objects, then if we go back to our example, as I said, we've got a tree-like structure, and that then maps on to a document tree which we can navigate around. And again, even more interestingly, the Document Object Model API enables us to dynamically add or remove elements in the tree. So we can, without having to refresh the whole page, we can change certain parts of the document. So in this particular case, I've possibly at the click of a button or merely at some sort of timeout, I've added a new paragraph to the body of the document. And of course I can remove paragraphs as well. So the Document Object Model gives you a coherent structure way of viewing the structure of an HTML document, but more importantly, it's got an associated API which enables us to add or remove elements in the document tree and change or update values of attributes of the elements themselves. Just to say in passing, you probably will have noticed that at the beginning of the tree, actually prior to the root HTML tag, is the doc type, which I mentioned in the last lecture. And that's a special tag. It begins with an exclamation mark to identify it as one of the two kinds of special tags, which we tend not to talk about too much in the document object model, because they won't change. Once you've set a doc type, for example, you certainly wouldn't want to dynamically, neither would you be able to dynamically update it, because it only is useful at the beginning of loading the document. So to identify the document type so that the browser knows how to parse it. We can also, with that exclamation mark, start off a comment tag, another special type of tag which we haven't seen yet, and you will of course find that useful. That's how you insert comments. So after the beginning of that tag, ASCII text right up until the closure of that tag will be treated as hidden text, it won't be rendered in the browser. Although if you view source, it will be available in the source. So be a little bit careful about your comments, because they can be made visible to outside parties. So that comment information will be forwarded to the browser, and if anyone views source, then the HTML comments can be accessed and read. So don't put any private information, company specific policies or information in there because that will be public. So that's it. Quite a short lecture to keep it focused on the DOM API. We've shown how HTML elements can be, in principle, manipulated. I haven't shown you the technical details of how to do that, but that's the reason for the DOM being so important. It will, as you become more expert at using HTML, it will enable you to control the styling of the document, but also to update content within the document, within your document. On the way, we've also shown that tags can have attributes, and we'll come back to that in a couple of lectures' time, and identified two special tags, the doc type and the comments. Now let's start to go a little bit more deeply into parts of the document, and we'll start with the head of the document in the next lecture.